Hey everyone, New Year, Happy New Year. This is the Breakpoint Show. It's January 7th of 2025. You can see we're new and improved. We're all in different spots on the screen. That's because I'm using my StreamYard and to record this, and we came up with different
You're
spots.
in control now.
I'm in control. So if it goes well, I'll take all the credit. If it doesn't go well, if it goes well, we all get the credit. If it doesn't go well, I'll take the blame. So
hey guys, my New Year's resolution is 1080p, just to let you know. We got to start off with a bad joke. Come on.
Yes.
All right. Anyways,
yes.
I'm off for the year.
Mine's 4K because I'm large and in charge. So 4K.
All right, Chris. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You have way too much light in your background.
I'm being raptured right now. It's the end days.
I know you have way too. Usually it's like dark. It's like goth behind you and everything. So
it's a new year, new backgrounds.
I know.
Hey. So yeah, if folks are listening, be sure to go to our YouTube channel, see what Chris is talking about,
and go and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Give us a like us.
Please like us. We got nothing else.
We have complexes. we want to be liked. But this year is gonna be a little bit of the same, but we're gonna try to be a little more. I won't say edgy, but we're not gonna hold back as many punches as we did last year. So if we come with something that offends someone, we're not trying to offend. We're trying to illuminate a bad defect that we see in products or our community or stuff like that. So it's nothing personal. This is a disclaimer. Everything we say is our opinion, and it's not meant to be a personal attack on anyone. So let's
Chris, I'm already offended. Oh,
I know.
How could you say that?
Anyway. So we're going to talk about, it's 2025. We probably all have software around that has been alive or maybe been a zombie for over 10 years. So we're talking like .NET Framework, maybe web forms, maybe even original ASP. Not like, you guys remember the original ASP, right?
Oh yeah,
back in VB script, and I mean, I'm sure there's probably someone out there that still has a old school ASP app laying around that powers something for a team or a department or something like that. So, so what happens when you just finally bite the bullet? You get some budget and you start working on upgrading. Because I mean, my philosophy is don't fix it if it's not broken. I mean, the baking industry is still running on COBOL, on big IBM Z series that have been around for 30 years. So I mean, we have technology that's old, but when do you guys, so let me ask, when do you guys determine that software and tools and apps need to be upgraded?
Well, yeah. I'm gonna preface this and then throw it to Martin. Then Martin gets to say something. But people always say, "Hey, don't change it if it's not broken," and I agree with that most of the part. I think the problem is we live in a world of constant change. So whether you think you're changing something or you're not changing something, there's always something changing. Hardware is changed. IT administrators are pushing out new changes to the operating system. So you have to stay vigilant and mindful that whether your code changes or not, the environment your code runs does change. So your hand is essentially forced at some point to make a decision. And very often, if you go into GitHub and look at issues, there's a lot of people saying, I didn't change anything, but the code is all of a sudden broken. What do I do? So that'll set the context.
Well, they did change the code. They just didn't change their code.
Yeah.
Yeah, they upgraded NuGet packages or NPM packages. And so we're fighting that right now where I work is we're like 3 or 4 versions behind with Dev Express reporting tool. And it's a great tool, but in 4 versions, they break. There's a lot of difference between the old version and the new version. I mean, my thing is, if you're going to wait that long, you're going to pay the price. And we're paying the price of having to change a lot of code, where if we would have progressively worked up each version where it came out, had time to kind of see where things were broken, it would have been a much easier progression. And I think a lot of teams don't think about that. They also don't think about like security and safety when they build their apps. They just don't do yearly audit security on the things that get put into their apps either. So I don't know.
That's a thing, right? At some point, if you don't upgrade, and I'm also in favor of not fixing things when they are not breaking, but I think upgrading is something that you probably want to follow, upgrade paths, for many reasons. First of all, like you say, you can gradually increment the version, which means that the cognitive loads of you as a developer or your entire team is going to be much lower, because you can just look at the release notes, maybe digest 2 or 3 breaking changes, and maybe find something that you need to upgrade somewhere in another document that is there. But then it's only 4 things between the previous version and the current version. Whereas if you wait for 2 or 3 years, the entire world will have changed. There's potentially a new operating system. Your cloud platform has changed. The code and frameworks have changed. And there's so many things to learn. And the task of upgrading at that point becomes a lot. And again, you don't have to upgrade at that point, but there is going to be at some point this one thing that a customer or a project manager or someone else in the organization is going to ask you, like, hey, can you support this, I don't know, new authentication mechanism or something like that? And at that point, your entire team is going to look like, that's an easy change on paper, but that's a complex one, because all of a sudden you have to upgrade all the things.
Yeah.
Well, and that's, go ahead, Khalid.
Well, I'm saying it's funny we're talking about this on the New Year's episode, because it very much sounds like a New Year's resolution, right? We all start January 1st and we say, all right, this is the year of rock hard abs and big biceps, right? And we kind of overdo it, and now it's overwhelming, and now we kind of fail, right? So
we hurt ourselves.
Yeah. So I'm hearing, like, before it becomes overwhelming, set realistic goals. And maybe this is a good segue. Like, what are some first steps someone should take when looking at a migration for an existing app? So again, let's contextualize it.
Yeah.
Most .NET developers today are probably working on ASP.NET or some form of it. Let's just focus on web applications, because that's really the majority of what .NET people do. I know there's desktop folks. We love you, desktop folks. Don't get mad at us. There's mobile folks doing Xamarin and Maui. We like you folks too. We like you. No, we don't love you, but but let's focus on web development. So what are some of the first steps someone can do when taking an old .NET framework web app and trying to move it to .NET?
Yeah, so I have a question. Are we talking nothing changes in the database? So we're just talking everything that sits above the data store?
Well,
because for me, I always say if we're gonna upgrade and if we're gonna move to a new version, this is a great time to take a look at the data schema in the database and see if there's any improvements or anything that the business is asking for that we can get into like new tables, new columns and tables, new relationships. Because if we're going to change the software, we can change the data and the shape of the data to go along with that change. So for me, that's where I start. I kind of jump into the data and I go, are there anything that we can do in the data to give new capabilities for users and improve performance?
Well, I heard you say, Chris, like the first thing you really would do is talk to your users, right? Like that's actually a very good step, right?
It is.
Like we're talking about technology, but like maybe talking to the people who are impacted by your potential migration and getting them on board is
yes and no, I guess, right? I mean, it could be that you have a new .NET version, .NET 9 comes out. Do you upgrade from .NET 8 or do you wait for .NET 10 or do you wait for a couple of years until .NET 15 comes out?
Well, you wait till .NET 10 because it's LTS.
But really, because if you upgrade now, there's maybe 4 or 5 things in the change log, so it's an easy upgrade. And if you do the same thing next year, it's again an easy upgrade. I
know, but managers like to stay on the path of longest support. So that these are all things that I mean, to be honest, the first thing you do is you get your architect to come in and be a part of the plan. Then you talk to your users to see what priorities that they have, because everyone has a backlog. Everyone should have a backlog of features and new capabilities in their software. So the first thing I would do is make sure an architect is around, prioritize that backlog as a start for the new year, and then start working on stuff.
One of the next first steps is actually very surprising. I've talked to a few folks like at the tail end of last year that have existing systems or asking for advice in terms of migration, but they don't actually know how their system operates in production because they've either pushed it to the cloud or they just kind of deploy, and they don't have any APM tools in their production application. So they don't actually understand where the bottlenecks are, what migrating would do in terms of performance gains or resource utilization. So for me, maybe the first step, instead of trying to change a bunch of stuff, is getting some kind of APM software or open telemetry in your production environment to kind of map out what's actually happening inside your app.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, that'll give you a clear understanding of like, these are critical parts of our system and these ones are not that critical. People aren't using them. And then your team can take a strategy of, let's tackle the low impact sections first and see if we can upgrade those. Or if there's a sense of urgency within your operation, maybe you tackle the high risk areas first so that you know quickly whether you can do it or not. So that's really based on your risk profile as a team. But again, understanding what your application is actually doing in production, for me, always feels like a first step. Like, don't just start throwing patterns and library upgrades at something and hope for the best. That's a disaster. So, yeah. What do you have, Martin?
I think that is indeed a good approach. And I was going to say, I will throw one pattern at you there, because at least for .NET or ASP.NET applications and anything that essentially lives on a URL, there's a really cool pattern that helps you building those things. So there is the strangler fig pattern, which basically gives you an option to say, let's replace or rebuild or upgrade parts of the application without affecting the rest of the application. Of course, that doesn't work if you have this massive monolith and everything is tied together and is like one big bowl of spaghetti. But if you have different applications that do their own thing, like accounting and maybe support and so on, and they all live at the same URL, but at a different path of the URL, you could use the Strangler fig to put a reverse proxy or something like that, and just say, okay, this URL is now pointing to the new version, whereas the rest of the application is still going to be on the old version. So you can make it gradually.
You're talking this new architecture type that's come along in the last couple of years. Either some people call it vertical slice architecture, some people call it monolithic or modular monolithic. That's what we have at work with our backend platform. And I like those approaches, but you kind of had to have looked and seen the future and plan for that. Maybe that's another show that we talk about. How do you start a new project? So we're talking about upgrading a new project now. Maybe the next show we'll talk about, like, hey, we talked about upgrading and moving our software from legacy to newer legacy, because we all know legacy, any code that we did yesterday is legacy. And so next show we'll talk about, like, how do you start a project and a application correctly. So, but yeah, Martin, I think if you do have the capability to kind of have pieces of in segments, decoupled areas of your system, that is the best way. It kind of goes back to what Cleet said too, is you find the areas, either you find the areas that have the most issues, or you have or you find the areas that have the least impact, that maybe you have a lot of need for, like, adding new capabilities to get people to use those areas more. And sorry, everyone, I am on a Mac, and I brought up one of the new, I don't know what you call them, the visual cues or something. So
it's fine. If you're just listening to this episode, you won't even notice.
Yeah, I did a thumbs up, and
they notice now, Martin.
Yeah,
they notice now. We pointed it out.
See, if you're listening to us, you need to go over to YouTube, because it's a lot funnier. Already two things that are a lot funnier. So go subscribe in YouTube and like us. So
well, to give folks some, like, homework to do, Martin talked about potentially reverse proxies and the Strangler fig pattern. Some tools that teams can maybe deploy into, a staging environment, or even their production environment with low risk. Probably Nginx, if you want to do stuff all by yourself and, like, manage that, and you have a DevOps team. Nginx is a good option. If you're of the C# persuasion, which I assume most folks are listening to the Breakpoint Show, you probably want to look at YARP. I know there's ProxyKit out there. I don't know if ProxyKit's still maintained or not, but ProxyKit and YARP are .NET options. If you're in the cloud, what's Azure's version? Like Screen Door? You probably don't want a Screen Door on a submarine, but Screen Door or Backdoor, or no, Backdoor.
Front door, I think. Front door.
It's a door. Go look it up on Azure. It's somewhere there. So there's that. I think AWS has, like, Route 53 or something like that. So look at those reverse proxy options based on your environment. I will say YARP is probably the best option for .NET folks, because they can probably fit it into their existing deployment pipeline, and they can test those things locally. So give that a try. See if you can get your application behind a proxy with little to no change to your existing app. and see if that works. I think that's a good recommendation. So, okay. So we've talked to our architects, Chris. Good advice. We've talked to our users. We figured out our application service map and the hotspots in our app. We've set up a proxy so that we now have the ability to apply this strangler fig pattern. What do we start doing to upgrade? Do we just start changing code?
You need something else. Yeah. You need something else.
Go ahead, Martin.
Before you start changing things, you probably want to have some tests, whether manual, whether automated, but you want to be sure that whatever you upgrade is still working as intended afterwards.
That's good advice.
That brings me back to when I talked to some people that were on the Roslyn team, and, you know, when they moved the C# compiler from C++ to C#, they had to bring bugs along. So there were many bugs in the compiler, and they could have just said, "Hey, we're going to fix all those bugs," but they couldn't because they had huge enterprise customers that had workarounds for those bugs, and if they would have done that, they would have broken lots of customers' software out there. So there's one example of what Martin's saying. You have to build these tests to make sure that you're bringing everything with the same shape and the same kind of blemishes along with it. So sometimes you have to bring bugs in your upgrade because other people may be using your software and you can't pull the rug out from underneath them. So I love that idea, Martin, that build tests to make sure that your end result meets the same shape and capabilities of your original.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me a next step, so like we haven't changed any code up to this point. We've taken record of what we have. I think the next step is probably to look, because this is going to be a problem for a lot of .NET folks moving, like .NET Framework folks moving to .NET, is really the third-party dependencies. Yeah. If you're someone who takes 0 third-party dependencies, you've used everything from Microsoft, you still might have this issue because clearly like features get deprecated and frameworks and libraries get deprecated or moved to something else. So you still want to take like a list of all your third-party dependencies that your application depends on and see if it exists in the new world and see how many versions behind you are, right? So like understanding whether certain parts of your system are actually upgradable. And if there isn't a one-to-one package that you can move to, you're probably going to have to find replacements, right?
No.
Luckily for a lot of folks in the newer .NET, there's a lot more in the box. So you may actually be able to remove dependencies by just adopting what's in .NET. But can you guys remember a dependency that when upgrading, you were like, oh man, that's a pain in the butt?
Well, actually, yes, I can.
NED framework was a pain in the butt to move from .NET Framework to .NET Core.
Looking at, at the time when we built migrating, we built that entire thing on top of WCF OData services, which was great and worked really well. But to upgrade that one, we actually had to dig into the new OData libraries, which are good, but you have to make sure that they all mimic the exact behavior that the WCF service had beforehand, where in WCF that came out of the box, but we had to implement a lot of things that weren't out of the box in the new framework.
Yeah, that's, it's funny. It's like I almost feel when it comes to dependencies, people are better off now than the early adopters who tried to do the migrations, because there was a lag between the maintainers adopting .NET. So a lot of packages didn't migrate over early on. But at this point, the .NET ecosystem, especially with like third-party packages, have all but supported .NET at this point.
Yeah.
And there are alternatives. So this is an area I feel like people might actually have an easier time now rather than like 4 or 5 years ago. The only concern I have for folks picking up new dependencies is if you're really, really old .NET framework, you probably don't have a lot of async await in your code. And a lot of these dependencies and packages have moved to asynchronous code. And that's going to require a lot of code changes. And I think that's the danger of a lot of these upgrade paths at this point for folks.
Yeah, and I will say that there were some in the beginning when the first maybe 4 or 5 versions of .NET Core, when it was called .NET Core, and there were assistants that were around to help you kind of migrate. And those assistants haven't been maintained. So I think people are like, oh, everyone should have upgraded by now. But yeah, so if you do want to use like Microsoft's .NET upgrade assistant, just know that it only goes up to .NET 5 is the highest version that it migrates to.
Well,
I think there's a newer version. Yeah,
Is there a newer version?
I know Amazon had a version, but that's, looking at their website, seems to have stopped at some point. In terms of
the Amazon
maintained.
one was the AWS one was, it was very hard to work with.
Yeah.
So,
but I think this is a nice lead into another thing. So there are going to be code changes because of dependencies and so on. But luckily for us, I think .NET has a really rich tooling environment, tooling community as well. There's JetBrains tools like ReSharper and Rider that will help you update language versions, but also update certain constructs, pass cancellation tokens, maybe use an async version if there's both an async version and a non-async version and all that. And looking at the .NET's migration assistance, it's actually marketed as an upgrade assistant to go from .NET Framework to .NET Core and the newer .NET versions.
good.
I actually think there's much more potential there to make it something that can modernize your codes, whether you're using .NET Framework, the very old one, or a newer version like .NET 7, and you want to upgrade to .NET 9. I think it's really cool that it's built around this concept of looking at your codes, looking at the structure of your code, and then upgrading it to whatever the new format should be. So it would be a really nice world if pretty much any open source and commercial library out there would ship with assistance to upgrade from the previous version to the new one. And then you can probably automate a lot of things, and much more than the marketing slogan that is on there to upgrade from .NET Framework to .NET Core.
Yeah,
that's a very cool idea, Martin.
yeah,
Like,
that is. And
yeah.
I think maybe this might be a good way for AI to help. I mean, I'm not a big fan of AI for everything, but if there were models that were built around this idea of migrating old code to new code, I would love to see something like that, like some kind of model to do that could help you move forward. So,
So we've talked about dependencies and like third-party packages, but clearly the plumbing code of .NET Framework and .NET is substantially different. I think that's probably, I'm going to use this phrase, I don't know if it's correct, but it's probably the most culture shock moment for folks moving from .NET Framework to .NET. And honestly, for me, going from .NET to .NET Framework, it's like a reverse culture shock when I realize and remember, oh, there's a global ASAX file, all the config is in XML. I think folks moving to .NET will probably realize, like, what is this program.cs file? Why is everything in C#? Like, what are some things that people should look out for in that migration that is like core and central to .NET itself? Because I think those are going to be challenges too, and those can catch a lot of people. So are there parts of, say, ASP.NET that folks should watch out for when doing this migration?
Good one. There's one that comes to my mind. I think Chris already alluded to it. That's Entity Framework. If you have Entity Framework 6, for example, and you're updating or upgrading to Entity Framework Core, it's mostly the same, but also not exactly the same. So there might be edge cases where some queries are going to give you different results. Perhaps not in terms of result sets, but might be slower or even faster, depending on what you're trying to do. Where some of the lazy loading, for example, is not enabled by default anymore. So all of a sudden, if you're depending on lazy loading, it might be that you are not seeing related entities. It might not even throw exceptions, and it might not even be visible at design time, but you could get like partial results where if you're lucky that your database context already has some of the related entities, it might show them, but that's not everything that's in the database. So there's a couple of really interesting edge cases in there.
Well, and you hit on it. I mean, you remember back in Entity Framework, the old Entity Framework, what did we use to store all the information? EDMX.
Mm-hmm.
So some people have to now move from EDMX to DB context, and that's a big move. I don't think there's anything that can take an EDMX file and programmatically like migrate that to a DB context. So basically, I almost think you could do the scaffolding for Entity Framework Core and just rescaffold your existing database, and that can create a DB context for you. But like Martin said, does that give you a 100% migration from the old EF to the new EF core? I mean, that's where tests have to come in to make sure that all of your calls, all of your queries, and all of your CRUD calls behave the same way from the old way to the new way.
There's one additional thought that I had on tests. Like if you have Entity Framework 6 and you have Entity Framework Core and you would write unit tests or something that tests as part of your codes and doesn't even run the application and so on, you probably also want to make sure that those tests are correct and are returning what you expect. And I think in this upgrade scenario, probably something like integration tests would be better to have. Because then you can look at the behavior and not necessarily at the implementation of things.
Yeah. Yep.
But you know, I'll put an asterisk on that, Martin. I think integration tests are really good.
Yeah.
But you also have to be mindful that the database engine that you're using in your integration test matches your production environment. I see a lot of folks try to use SQL Server locally and then deploy to, say, SQL Azure. And the behavior profile is just different enough that it causes bugs and issues. So be mindful when introducing integration tests that the database engine and the behavior of your integration tests matches your production. You're going to have to choose whether it's close enough or you need it to be exact.
Yeah.
But just be mindful of that, because I see a lot of folks feel confident in their testing, go to production, and then it's a tire fire of epic proportion.
Yeah, that's when you pull in you pull in possibly you pull in test containers
Mm-hmm.
to encapsulate your testing environments to meet that need, Khalid. So
yeah, I mean, another thing I see in old .NET Framework applications that I think is going to be difficult for folks is the dependency on HTTP context and everything that relies on HTTP context, including the authentication, the user information. So I've been doing research on the data protection libraries that are in .NET. Data protection is the cryptographic part of .NET that does things like sign your cookie, secure your user information so that people can authenticate in like web farm scenarios. So if you're distributing your .NET Framework application, this was the role of the machine key that was commonly found in your web config, right? So you put the machine key in the web config, and now you can deploy your web application across multiple machines, and each machine can decrypt that cookie. In .NET, the newer .NET ASP.NET Core, you're going to have to switch over to the data protection like libraries. And there you have to figure out where you want to store those data protection keys. You have options to store them in the database. You can store them in blob storage if you're in the cloud, or you could store them in something like Redis. But those are really options you have to choose. But that's something too, I think a lot of people are going to struggle with when migrating from .NET Framework. Also, the direct dependency on HTTP context, that object has changed dramatically from .NET Framework to .NET Core or ASP.NET Core. So keep that in mind. If you're using HTTP context in a lot of places, that's probably a pain point you're going to run into.
So not only HTTP context, I think ASP.NET Core has changed significantly as well with the entire new dependency on dependency injection basically everywhere. So if you still have old .NET Framework ASP.NET codes, there's a big chance things are going to look very, very differently in the new world.
Yeah. The DI, built-in DI gives you a lot of strength, but yes, migrating old .NET Framework code to new and bringing that forward. And you want to use DI, that it's going to be, there's going to be some work involved in that, definitely.
I will say, let's not scare folks. If you made the choice 10 years ago to pick MVC or Web API, those structural classes are very, very similar. I think you're in a very good position to migrate. If you made the choice to invest into web forms, Martin, go ahead. You break the bad news.
Let's say you want to look into extended support of your Windows Server installation.
I'm sorry,
well, and that even talks about, we're just talking about migrating from .NET Framework to .NET Core / like ASP.NET Core. But what if someone is upgrading all that and moving to the cloud from like a local data center? I mean, because I know a lot of companies that do that too. They're like, hey, we're going to upgrade to the cloud, and the old architecture, software architecture and system architecture don't really fit in cloud, or they should think about that. So that even like maybe is a future episode of like what do you need to think about when you're moving from local data centers to the cloud. So maybe that's 2 episodes from now. We'll talk about that. So I think we've got lots of paths for the future, but it is, I mean, it is a complex thing, and we're kind of reaching the end of the time that we like to have for these episodes. So if there is any kind of, we'll go through kind of last thoughts, but it is a complex thing. It's not something that you can just start doing. Don't change code to begin with. Too many developers think that upgrading is about changing code. No, it's about changing how you look at your software and look at the applications that you build. So that's my last thought. I hope I didn't cut anyone off. If there was more things to talk about.
No.
No.
I think in terms of last thoughts, there's maybe two more. One we already started with. If it is not broken, don't fix it, but also maybe try to follow on all the upgrades, because it's going to make your life easier doing the upgrades if it's purely technical. So going from .NET 8 to 9, for example, with just a couple of things in the changelog. The other one, Chris, that was actually a good point that you brought up. Modernizing your code base doesn't necessarily mean just maintaining the status quo, so to speak, in terms of technical, the implementation of the entire application. Maybe it's also a good opportunity to rethink how you architecture and how you build the entire application. So maybe you just want to go not from ASP.NET MVC to new ASP.NET MVC, but maybe you want to look into modernizing this thing in using Blazor or React or whatever, depending on the changing needs of your business.
Well, yeah, and that's a totally different subject. Is how do you migrate from a server-side ASP.NET application to something that is that SPA with a backend system? That even is a more I think is a more complex upgrade, where I would think that would be a rewrite, that would be in the rewrite kind of column. That's not really an upgrade in my view. That's just we're rewriting the whole system going forward.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess my last thoughts here is I'm constantly reminded slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So take your time, talk to your users, talk to your team, get buy-in, understand what your goals are for an upgrade. I think very often people just want new for new's sake, but write down your goals of why you want to upgrade. Is it better security, better resource utilization, more maintainability and extensibility of your applications? So understand your goals first before you go into this, so that you can prioritize your decision making early in the process, so it doesn't become chaotic. And I think, remember, you're a team, you're working together, you're trying to succeed for your sake and the sake of your stakeholders. And enjoy yourself. This is going to be fun. You're moving and learning new things. So I think,
and you're bringing new skills. So it's helping the company, helping your team, and helping yourself. So we kind of reached the end of this first episode of the new year. I want to say Happy New Year again to everyone. We are going to be doing this every 2 weeks. Hopefully every 2 weeks, if everything goes well. Seems like we have a topic for the next 2 episodes. So I'll get those down on paper when we get out of here. So just know next episode will probably be around starting a new application or system or project from the start, and what you need to do for that. And then the next one is we'll talk about, like, how do you move to the cloud? Like what type of thinking and what type of areas do we need to look at? And there's probably overlap between this episode and the next episode and that follow-up episode. So it'll be kind of like a Venn diagram, but for the most part, I think there are clear paths that deviate and don't cross over between the three areas. But guys, I want to say it's been great. Last year was awesome. Look forward to this year, and thank you. So really appreciate you guys. So
Likewise.
Yeah. Bye, everybody. Enjoy the new year. Bye.
Bye.